We have breaking news out of the January 6th Select Committee. Just moments ago, the panel issued a subpoena to former Trump trade advisor Peter Navarro, who was a key insider in the campaign by the former president and his allies to overturn the election and secure a second Trump term. In a statement, the committee says, quote, Mr. Navarro appears to have information directly relevant to the Select Committee's investigation into the causes of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. He hasn't been shy about his role in efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election and has even discussed the former president's support for those plans. More than 500 witnesses have provided information in our investigation, and we expect Mr. Navarro to do so as well. The committee goes on to cite what Navarro dubbed the, quote, Green Bay sweep, a plan concocted by him and Steve Bannon to get Republican congressmen to delay and ultimately stop the certification of Joe Biden's Electoral College win. Jackie, Yamiche, and David are all back with me. Yamiche, what is it that the committee expects they can get from Peter Navarro?
It's a great question. I mean, Peter Navarro was someone who's very close to former President Trump. And even I was reading this part of the subpoena and really making connections to the fact that Peter Navarro also wrote a book recently where he essentially detailed the idea that there was a real push to try to overturn the election. So he could have all sorts of information on whose ideas were sort of rising to the top, because there were so many sort of ideas flowing through the White House about how to help former President Trump falsely and essentially illegally hold on to power since he lost the election. He also is someone who was close to the president, so he can speak to his state of mind. He can speak to his intent. He can speak to possibly who was in the room, who were the people who were sort of leading the charge. I also think it would be interesting to see whether or not Peter Navarro, what his proximity was to former President Trump during January 6th, i.e. during the violence, this 187 minutes that the chairman has always talked about being the sort of black box inside the White House, that being the time between when former President Trump essentially learned about the attack and when something was actually done to try to stop the attack on a federal level. So I think there's a lot of things the committee could be looking at for Peter Navarro, but the chief thing people should really consider is the fact that Peter Navarro was someone who was close to the president, who was in key meetings, and who was at the White House during all of this happening, while all of this was happening, rather.
Right, and Jackie, to this one line from the committee, haven't been shy about his role in efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. He has not been quiet about this. He has been out there talking about this. And they specifically reference believing that he has documents and information that are relevant to the Select Committee's investigation. What could those documents and that information be?
Yeah, in his new book and in an interview with Rolling Stone, he laid out all of the plans that they had and that they were discussing inside the White House and outside the White House to overturn the results of the election, this so-called Green Bay sweep. I think that the committee is hoping that he has more documents illuminating some of the planning around that and who exactly he was reaching out to from a very local level all the way to the top up in the Oval Office to see if just how far in the main channels of the administration this idea got. And just to review really quick, this Green Bay sweep was a plan that Navarro has described extensively in public. It involved getting Congress to debate the electoral results of 6 of the swing states that went for Biden for 4 hours each. That would be a 24-hour spectacle, most likely publicized on television, and after which the results of the election would then be declared in dispute so that Congress would revert to a fallback where the House would have to pick the new president with 1 vote per congressional delegation, as at least outlined in the plan. Navarro had sort of decided that with Republicans holding a majority of congressional delegations, they would then likely win and achieve their goal of overturning the results of the election. That obviously didn't work, but Navarro has bragged about having the support of at least 100 Republican lawmakers in the House, support in the states, and the support of the former president. I think that the committee is going to want to see what else exactly he has to speak to there and who else was on board.
Joining our conversation, MSNBC chief legal correspondent and host of The Beat, Ari Melber. Ari, your thoughts on this breaking news?
It's a big deal. When we last interviewed Peter Navarro here on MSNBC on The Beat, we discussed these issues, some of what you have just referred to in your guest, that Mr. Navarro is open in admitting, confessing, if you will, to a plan to try to overthrow the election, what they called the sweep, to coordinate that with members of Congress. It relates and overlaps with this fraudulent electors plot, which may also involve crimes of forgery. When I spoke to him, he said at that time he had not heard from the committee. We asked that because we wondered, given the nature of his admissions, both in the book, in the interviews, etc., whether they would actually want to talk to him. Now we get that development. And you widen out, and what you see is that the committee that began looking most clearly and specifically at the events of that day, the tactical storming of the Capitol, and what, if anything, the administration knew or intended about that storming, has now broadened into something that has multiple parts. It's not, for us yet, I don't think we know yet exactly where the levels of coordination all overlapped or not. But it's certainly striking that this fraudulent electors plot that many investigators, state and federal, say could be a crime, overlaps with this so-called sweep. The bottom line was take an election that was lawfully won, certified by secretaries of state, and try to use these measures. What Mr. Navarro insisted was, quote, lawful. The committee and other investigations may ultimately determine that, but to use those to instill enough doubt, hopefully they wanted, through Mike Pence, who of course recently spoke out, to create doubt, to wake up on January 7th and not have it be established who the winner of the election was, because it wouldn't have been on their plan formally certified yet, and to take that out to the 20th and interfere with the transfer of power. So we are in the neighborhood of potential coups with an individual who says he basically would do a thing. He calls it a sweep. Other people would define it as a coup. He would do that thing lawfully, and he just didn't pull it off. So I think it's a significant investigatory development.